On a Prayer. Faith is Awaken by Elton Thomas. Episode 20. A Life Reclaimed. Roxy sat in the small examination room of St. Mary's Hospital, the sterile smell of disinfectant clinging to the air around her. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a harsh glow over the white walls and polished floors. Despite the familiar surroundings, Roxy felt out of place, like a stranger in her own body. She glanced down at her hands, the bruises still faintly visible on her skin, a reminder of the past she was trying to leave behind. Across from her, Lucy Embry sat on a stool, her face calm and gentle as she finished taking notes on her clipboard. Lucy's presence had been a lifeline for Roxy, a steady force in the whirlwind of her recovery. It had been weeks since Dusty had found her in that alley, and though the physical wounds were healing, the scars left on her heart were harder to mend. "How are you feeling today, Roxy?" Lucy asked, her voice soft but attentive, her eyes filled with genuine concern. Roxy hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where the faint outline of the city could be seen through the glass. She had been asked that question so many times, but today it felt different. Today, the answer was harder to find. "I'm better," Roxy said slowly, her voice quieter than she intended. "But sometimes it feels like I'm still stuck there, in that alley. Like part of me can't move on." Lucy nodded, understanding the weight behind Roxy's words. She had seen this before, the way trauma clung to people long after the events that caused it had passed. But she also knew that Roxy was stronger than she realized, that she was already starting to reclaim the pieces of herself that had been broken. "That's normal," Lucy said, her tone reassuring. "Healing isn't linear. There are going to be days when it feels like you're still living in the past. But what matters is that you're here, now. You survived, and you're taking the steps to move forward." Roxy let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly at Lucy's words. It was true. She had survived. And every day, with Lucy's help, she was learning how to live again. But there were still moments when the weight of her past felt too heavy to carry. She shifted in her seat, her hands resting on her lap as her thoughts drifted back to that night. The night everything had changed. The memory was still vivid in her mind, as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I keep thinking about what happened in the church," Roxy said quietly, her voice tinged with hesitation. "I've never talked about it before, but I think it's time." Lucy set the clipboard aside, her attention fully focused on Roxy. She had sensed that something significant had happened that night, something that went beyond the physical injuries Roxy had endured. But she had waited for Roxy to be ready, knowing that some stories needed to be told on their own terms. Roxy swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she prepared to revisit that moment. "Dusty saved my life," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He found me in that alley, just when I thought it was over. The men, they were going to kill me." Lucy's eyes softened with empathy, but she remained silent, letting Roxy continue at her own pace. "I don't remember much after that," Roxy admitted, her gaze distant as the memories played out in her mind. "Everything was a blur. I was hurt, scared. Dusty carried me into a church nearby. That's where we met Pastor Ethan." Roxy's fingers clenched slightly, the weight of the memory heavy on her chest. "But it wasn't just that. Something happened in that church. Something I still can't explain." Lucy leaned in slightly, her curiosity piqued. She could see the conflict in Roxy's expression, the way she wrestled with the memory. "They followed us into the church," Roxy continued, her voice quieter now. "Jackson's men. I thought it was the end. Dusty. He was ready to fight them, but he knew we were outnumbered." Her breath caught as she recalled the gunshot, the way her heart had frozen in that moment. "One of them pulled the trigger. I was sure Dusty was dead." Lucy's eyes widened slightly, but she remained calm, her gaze locked on Roxy's face. She knew there was more to the story, something deeper, something that had changed Roxy in ways she was still trying to understand. But then, "Nothing happened," Roxy whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The gun went off, but Dusty was fine. No bullet, no blood, nothing. The men were just gone, like they'd never been there in the first place. Lucy's breath hitched at the revelation, her mind racing to comprehend what Roxy was describing. It sounded impossible, like something out of a dream. But the look in Roxy's eyes told her it was real, at least real enough for Roxy. I didn't believe in miracles before that night, Roxy said, her voice barely audible. But something happened in that church, something that saved us. I don't know how or why, but I felt it. I felt protected. Tears welled in Roxy's eyes as the weight of the memory washed over her. It had been a moment of pure terror, but it had also been a moment of profound clarity, one that had stayed with her ever since. Lucy reached out, placing a comforting hand on Roxy's arm. "It sounds like you experienced something powerful," she said gently, "and maybe that's part of what's helping you heal." Roxy nodded, wiping at her eyes as she tried to compose herself. "It is. I think about that night all the time, and every time I do, I feel a little stronger. Like I'm not just a victim anymore. Like I'm reclaiming my life, bit by bit." Lucy smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride at Roxy's resilience. "You are reclaiming your life," she said firmly. "Every day you move forward, you're taking control of your future. And you don't have to do it alone. You have people who care about you. Dusty, Pastor Ethan, and me. We're here to help you every step of the way." Roxy's chest tightened with emotion, but this time it wasn't fear or sorrow. It was hope. Hope for a future that wasn't defined by the trauma of her past, but by the strength she was finding in herself and in the people who had stood by her. "I never thought I'd get here," Roxy admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But now, I'm starting to believe that maybe I can rebuild. Maybe I can start over." Lucy's smile widened, her eyes filled with encouragement. "You can," she said confidently. "And you will." For the first time in a long time, Roxy believed her. That night, as Roxy sat alone in her small apartment, she thought about the choices that had led her here. She had spent so many years running, from her past, from her pain, from herself. But now, for the first time, she was facing it head on. And it wasn't as terrifying as she had once thought. She looked around the room, bare walls, minimal furniture, the faint hum of the city outside. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was a start. Roxy leaned back against the couch, her mind drifting back to Dusty and the way he had looked at her that night in the church. He had saved her life, but it wasn't just about the physical act of rescuing her from danger. He had shown her that she was worth saving, that she had something left to fight for. And now, she was ready to fight for herself. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the past felt too heavy to bear. But Roxy knew she wasn't the same person she had been in that alley. She wasn't the broken woman who had been left for dead. She was stronger now, wiser. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in the possibility of a future filled with hope, with healing, with love. Roxy closed her eyes, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she whispered a silent prayer. For the life she was reclaiming, for the strength she was discovering, and for the people who had helped her find her way back.